Julian Leeser, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, David.
So you called this a terrorist attack on the day you directly linked it to the Albanese government's position at the United Nations. ASIO now says it was Iran that was responsible. Were you wrong to rush to judgment?
No, David, I don't think I was. This was a terrorist attack in my view. As we found out, it's a terrorist attack that's been propagated by Iran. What has Iran's objective in its operations in Australia been? To cause division, to cause fear in the Jewish community and in the Persian community, and to move Australia away from its traditional allies and security partners, the United States and Israel, on the global stage. What we've seen this week in the decision to list the IRGC and to expel the ambassador was the right move, but it was the right move 2.5 years too late. We have seen Iran orchestrate an attack on Australians on Australian soil, a series of attacks. The Adass Israel synagogue arson attack occurred while there were people in that synagogue. Australians could have been killed. I visited that synagogue. It is one of the most heart-wrenching occasions in my life, seeing the twisted metal of the chairs and furniture that were burned, seeing the Torah ark that was there hollowed out, seeing the memories of a community desecrated. We've seen it in the Lewis Deli as well in Bondi, and we know that there are further activities that Iran has been involved in. Our problem as the coalition was that we were calling on the government to list the IRGC 2.5 years ago. They had a report from a Senate committee. It's clear from FOI that Home Affairs were preparing to list, and Claire O'Neill, the then Home Affairs Minister, in February 2023 gave a very significant speech where she called out foreign interference by Iran in this country, where she talked about the way in which ASIO had detected and disrupted a foreign interference operation that included surveillance of Iranian Australians and their families. The government was well and truly on notice to do this 2.5 years ago. And my problem with the government is every time they've been asked to do something in relation to improving our security, particularly in relation to the Jewish community, they have been dragging the chain.
But you went a lot further than that at the time, as we just heard. You said, in my view, there is a direct line between the government's position at the United Nations and the arsonists' fuse. Where is the evidence of that?
Well, I think when you create a situation where you delegitimise the Jewish state, which is what the government has been doing in relation to a series of its votes at the United Nations, you delegitimise Jewish people here, and you create an atmosphere where low-life criminals are prepared to take money from an organisation backed ultimately by the Iranian regime to commit crimes against Jewish people.
So you think the people who actually were responsible for the arson attack drew inspiration from the Albanese government's position? Is that your suggestion?
No, I'm not saying that, David. I'm saying that when you create an atmosphere where you delegitimise the Jewish state, you ultimately delegitimise the Jewish people and make it acceptable for people to think, oh, well, why don't I go and firebomb a synagogue?
You don't think this was more to do with them being paid as criminals to carry out an attack that was orchestrated by Iran? That's what ASIO says.
Well, you can be paid to do something, but you hope even some people have a line in the sand, and you think perhaps something's more acceptable if an atmosphere is being created in a community where the Jewish community has been as it were, isolated, and the Jewish state has been isolated.
So if the Albanese government had a different vote at the UN, you think these alleged criminals, these young men, wouldn't have done it?
David, what we've seen since the election of the Albanese government is a great change in policy in relation to Israel. We saw it a year before the October 7 terrorist attacks, when the Albanese government changed the position in a very ham-fisted way on the capital of Israel.
I understand all of that. Just to back to the question, though, you honestly still think the Albanese government wears blame for the Adass synagogue attack?
Well, the Albanese government wears blame for not having acted quickly enough in relation to the listing of the IRGC and in doing everything it can to protect Jewish Australians.
OK. Let's turn to whether this could have been prevented had it been listed earlier, the IRGC. We heard the ASIO boss. He says a complex web of proxies were used to hide Iran's involvement. Even if it had been listed as a terrorist organisation, would that have made any difference if those on the ground had no idea who was behind it?
Well, listing terrorist organisations does a few things. Firstly, it says that one should have nothing to do with a particular terrorist organisation. Secondly, and the fact that the terrorist organisation has been listed may well degrade its operations in a particular country. And it says that one shouldn't associate with terrorist organisations because that in of itself becomes a crime, and that you shouldn't finance or accept finance from terrorist organisations. The point of listing the IRGC in 2023 was that we'd had representations from the Persian community. People forget that there were tens of thousands of Persian Australians and Australians on the streets protesting human rights abuses in Iran. They forget that there was a Senate committee. They forget that Claire O'Neill was taking steps, and her department were taking steps to list the IRGC at that time. The fact that the IRGC was not listed, I think, was the wrong decision.
And you said during the week you were incandescent with fury about Labor's dragging its heels on listing the IRGC. How do you feel about your own side of politics, the coalition also resisting calls to list the Revolutionary Guard when it was in power?
Well, David, when we were in power, we began listing the Iran proxies. We listed Hamas and Hezbollah in full, but the Mahsa Amini murder changed everything because it brought tens of thousands of Iranians onto the streets, Iranian Australians onto the streets. It sparked the Senate committee inquiry, which saw recommendations for the listing of the IRGC as a terrorist organisation. It saw calls by me as the then Shadow Attorney-General to say that we would support changes to the law to assist the government.
I appreciate that. But I'm talking about earlier, when the coalition was in government. I mean, Andrew Hasties talked about his view as the chair of the Intelligence Committee at the time. He wanted the coalition to list it. Kylie Moore-Gilbert too. She spent, of course, 2 years in jail in Iran. She's criticised what she says is an attempt to politicise this. Now, here's what she posted during the week, saying that the coalition government failed to prescribe the Revolutionary Guard. She says, "I was taken hostage by the IRGC and brought home, all under the coalition. Not a single sanction has ever been applied over my wrongful arrest." Why didn't the coalition take any action after Kylie Moore-Gilbert suggested it?
Well, we did take the action in relation to the other Iran proxies, but the real change, as I said,
not the IRGC.
David, well, the real change in relation to the IRGC occurred as a result of the Mahsa Amini murders and the protests that we saw here, and the fear of the Iranian community. I mean, I represent the fourth largest Persian community in the country. I remember having meetings in my office where they would bring telephone books with people's size documents with people's photographs on them showing people that had been disappeared by the regime. I had Claire Chandler, who ran that Senate committee, doing a function in my electorate for the Iranian community, and I had people telling me that they were not prepared to attend the function because they were concerned about IRCG agents and people from the embassy who might be spying on them and might interfere with their lives and their families.
So you had no criticism of your own side for ignoring Andrew Hastie, Kylie Moore-Gilbert and others when it had the chance?
Well, my view is that the Mahsa Amini thing changed everything. Okay. It's not as if we didn't do anything. We listed Hamas and Hezbollah. They are the other Iranian proxies in this country while we were in government.
Let me turn to the war in Gaza, Julian Leeser. I understand your criticism of Hamas and Hezbollah, the Iranian proxies. We've heard that regularly. Do you have any criticism, though, of Israel and how it's conducted itself in this war?
Well, I want to say a couple of matters of principle. I think the first thing is that, like all Australians, I'm distressed by the images that we continue to see coming out of Gaza. I want to see this war end. I want to see the aid get through. I want to see the hostages released. And I want to see a lasting peace in the Middle East. Israel, like Australia, is a Western liberal democratic country. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. It has free and fair elections. It has a robust judiciary. It has freedom of the press. It respects the rights of women and LGBTI minorities. Hamas, by contrast, is a terrorist organisation that we list as a terrorist organisation in this country. It is sponsored by Iran, the same Iran that launched attacks on Australia and Australians. I want to see this war end. I want to see this come to an end, but the ball is in Hamas's court to release the hostages. That is the key thing that needs to occur for this conflict to be brought to an end.
You said you're concerned about the images. Some of those images during the past week have seen the striking of a hospital, the Nasser hospital, more than 20 people killed there. Benjamin Netanyahu called it a tragic mishap, Susan Lee, called it absolutely horrific. What would you call that one incident?
I would say it's a tragedy, and Israel owned up to the tragedy, and they're launching an investigation, and that's the appropriate thing to do.
On a couple of other matters, marches against mass migration are planned across the country today, and some far-right neo-Nazi groups are getting involved. You've criticised some of the pro-Palestinian marches. What about this one? Should it go ahead or should it be banned?
Well, David, I'll say a couple of things. The first thing is, in relation to those pro-Palestinian marches that occurred recently, I can accept that there are Australians of goodwill who went along to those marches because they wanted to see an end to the suffering. But among the people who were at the marches were people calling for intifada, who were holding up pictures of the Ayatollah, who were holding terrorist flags. At the protest that's occurring today, there are people there of goodwill who want to change policies in relation to this country. But I'd say to them, be careful of the company you keep. I've seen some of the material for that particular protest, and I am really concerned about the anti-Indian sentiment that's been expressed and some of the anti-Semitic undertones of some of those protests. And I'd say to Australians, be careful of the company you keep.
The Home Affairs Minister visited Nauru on Friday, signed a deal there to transfer several hundred of the former immigration detainees known as the NZYQ cohort to the tiny Pacific island. It's going to cost Australian taxpayers $400 million up front and $70 million ongoing each year. Does the coalition support this sort of deal?
Well, look, this all comes out of the NZYQ cohort. This was a case that was entirely foreseeable, and yet the government really didn't foresee it. These people have no right to remain in Australia. They have exhausted all their avenues of appeal. They can no longer be detained indefinitely as a result of the High Court's decision. And so they can't be repatriated to their country of origin, and so they can be repatriated to a third country. And I think it's important that they are repatriated to a third country.
So you're okay with this arrangement?
Well, this is a sort of legitimate arrangement. The only reason that people can remain in Australia, and this is very well established under the migration law of this country, is if they're an Australian citizen or if they're on a valid visa. If they're not on a valid visa, then the Migration Act directs migration officials to remove them as soon as possible. Yeah, these people are some of the most violent criminals in this cohort, including murderers, including rapists, including child sex offenders. And since some of them have been released, they have reoffended. And the Minister has not used the preventative detention orders that he had enacted earlier in the piece, and we want him to use those orders. Yeah,
given their record and the seriousness of this, is a country with only a population of about 12,000 people really able to deal with that?
Well, that's a matter for the government of Nauru to assess as to whether this is the right arrangement for them. But I'm interested in what's the right arrangement for Australia, and the right arrangement for Australia is that these people no longer be in the country.
Part of this also involves the government passing legislation to allow their removal. It includes removing their right to procedural fairness. Are you okay with this? Is the coalition going to pass this waiving of natural justice for this cohort?
We're working through this legislation through our processes, but I will say this. This cohort of people have had ample opportunities to put their case. They have exhausted all appeal avenues, and the question now is whether they can be removed to another country. The removal is not usually a process which requires them to put forward arguments against that removal. They have made their arguments previously, some on many occasions, about why they deserve to remain in this country, and those arguments have all been rejected.
A final one, Julian Leeser, is one of the few remaining Liberals to hold a metropolitan seat in the country. Do you support the net zero emissions target?
Well, I've long been on the public record as a supporter of the net zero target, but Susan Lee has set up a process for us to look at our energy policy, and that's what we're going to do. We're going through that process. I think out of the process, I want to see a target that reduces emissions. I want to see a policy that reduces prices because Australian businesses and families are struggling. And I want to see something that increases reliability so our economy can grow. We're not going to be in government for the next 3 years. And during that time, we are already seeing emissions go up under Labor, prices go up, and reliability go down, and that needs to be the focus of our discussions on these issues.
And are you in the camp that says you've got to make a decision on net zero quickly, as in this year, or are you relaxed about taking your time?
I think we need to let the process take its course. I've got great confidence in my colleague Dan Tan and in Susan Lee, and I know they're going to run a good process.
Julian Leeser, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.